Everything looks good. That's all I want to make sure. Everything's still looks fine. Okay, ESG this week. Continuation with Adam Patrick from the Libertarian Institute podcast that I do, Year Zero. We're going to be covering Thomas Malthus, an essay on the principle of population, which if you have, after I read through my notes, because I have the notes that I want to prelude with, if you have any thoughts on or additions, just break in anytime you feel like. Don't hesitate. So, okay. So we'll get started. So here are the notes that I wanted to lay down as an introduction. Gnosticism is often attributed as early pre-Christian set of beliefs, but Gnosticism has continued to present day. There are many heretical beliefs held by Gnostics. For the sake of brevity, I want to focus on the common belief that a limited amount of people are granted esoteric knowledge by God as the primary Gnostic belief. In this view, it is my argument that Gnosticism or its ideas run through the entirety of the global elite and the managerial class. Whether discussing Davos, Bilderberg, or any of the government and regulations handed down for the betterment of society, it is a class of people that contend they know better than you how life is to be lived and maintained. Like kings of the past, they have elevated themselves to be gods on earth. I can't read that word. Oh, they work diligently. My handwriting's horrible. They work diligently to promote themselves to this status by promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, ESG, and war, all in the name of peace, prosperity, and science as the world religion.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that the folks that you're referencing, their ultimate goal is they want to live forever, right? They want whether it's their physical body or their sense of self. Yeah, I think that's kind of the whole transhumanism sort of argument. It's like they forget family, forget culture, forget your legacy lives on through your children. It's I need, as this super important person with this access to knowledge, I have to live forever.
Right.
And in order for me to do that, I have to come up with some physical means of manifesting the mystical. And then, of course, I'm going to look down on all of these other people who don't have access to this information. You're all just kind of in the way.
Right.
Is that a good? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. There was always that meme that ran through fairy tales of the fountain of eternal youth, right? And that's always been something that has been relied heavily on, the idea to live forever. And I think people had depended for a long time on the idea of legacy being that eternal youth, right? Like your legacy would live on beyond you, right? You know, like the Elton John song "Candle in the Wind." You know, the legend died out long before, or the candle died out long before the legend ever did. You know, so it was leaving that legacy onto your family that your family could live on, like the Kennedys would have done, the Rockefellers, Rothschilds. That legacy just keeps getting passed down. That wealth keeps getting passed down, and they continue to have that power because that family name. And it's become more of a physical manifestation of that symbolism of living forever through your legacy isn't enough. Now they want to live eternally and rule over, and they view the people as sheep, as cattle, as resources to be disposed of, and as lab rats to carry out their experiments on.
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw this, manifest itself most overtly during COVID, right? It wasn't about living, it was just about being alive, right? Anyone who is,
well, and look at who they were so worried about saving at the expense of who. They were concerned about saving the 70-plus-year-olds, because who else could be president other than a 70 or 80-year-old, and at the expense of children, right? So they were sacrificing the children for their own well-being, where it had always been in the past that you sacrifice your own well-being for the sake of the children and the existence of the future generations.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really difficult to not see that. Right. I mean, it was so, I think I wouldn't even say saying the quiet parts out loud. It's like they were writing a treatise on it in front of everybody's face.
Yeah, they were screaming it in your face.
Right.
Yeah.
Like a billboard.
I mean, yeah. Yeah. But you also have to remember, it was only those above that age of a certain class, because those that were in, nursing homes, they locked up COVID patients in there and killed them all off.
Yeah. Yeah. Can't have that garbage getting in the way. Right.
Right. Yeah. So, all right, I'm going to start the preface here. I don't like how this guy wrote, but considering this was written in the late 1700s, I guess it's all right.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not. Yeah, there's at this point in English where it doesn't, you're not going to like retranslate it, and it's right around that time.
Yeah.
So we're kind of stuck with the antiquated English that it's written in. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of, there are points where you're like, oh, wow, that's a beautiful adjective, or that's a brilliant way to describe something. Then there are some points it's like, that's how you want to start a sentence? Like, really? It's like,
It'll be interesting to hear it again. It's been so long since I've even read through it.
The following essay owes its origin to a conversation with a friend on the subject of Mr. Godwin's essay on avarice and profusion in his Inquirer. The discussion started the general question of the future improvement of society, and the author at first sat down with an intention of merely stating his thoughts to his friend upon paper in a clearer manner than he thought he could do in conversation. But as the subject opened up him, see, that's such weird. Opened up him. As the subject opened up him, some ideas occurred which he did not recollect to have met with before. And as he conceived that every least light on a topic so generally interesting might be received with candor, he determined to put his thoughts in a form for publication. The essay might undoubtedly have been rendered much more complete by a collection of a greater number of facts in elucidation of the general argument, but a long and almost total interruption from very particular business, joined to a desire, perhaps imprudent, of not delaying the publication much beyond the time that he originally proposed, prevented the author from giving to the subject an undivided attention. He presumes, however, that the facts which he has adduced will be found to form no inconsiderable evidence for the truth of his opinion respecting the future improvement of mankind. As the author contemplates this opinion at present, little more appears to him to be necessary than a plain statement, in addition to the most cursory view of society to establish it. This is the paragraph that I feel out of the preface is the most important. It is an obvious truth, which has been taken notice of by many writers, that population must always be kept down to the level of the means of substance. But no writer that the author recollects has inquired particularly into the means by which this level is effected. And it is a view of these means which forms to his mind the strongest obstacle in the way to any very great future improvement of society. He hopes it will appear that in the discussion of this interesting subject, he is actuated solely by a love of truth and not by any prejudices against any particular set of men or of opinions. He professes to have read some of the speculations on the future improvement of society in a temper very different from a wish to find them visionary, but he has not acquired that command over his understanding which would enable him to believe that what he wishes without evidence, or to refuse his assent to what might be unpleasing when accompanied with evidence.
Well, you're right about the wording. Wow.
It's actually it took me, I read through this thing 3 times today. So I can read it, but it's like the understanding of it, you have to really focus on it, which is why I took so many notes.
Yeah, I mean it's this is totally off subject, but it reminded me of listening to the Book of Mormon on audiobook, right? There's just so many words, and if you just took out all the superfluous words, you'd probably have like 4 pages instead of a book,
Yeah.
right? And like I obviously written for very very different purposes. So I don't know if that's have you read anything else by him? Is that generally like the tone of how he writes, or do you think
Well,
he's trying to pack it with words?
well, no, this is the only thing I've ever read by him, but you got to remember who he's writing to.
Hmm.
Also, he's not writing to you and I. He's not writing to the plebs. He's writing to the elites.
Yeah, so it's like
So,
elite language.
right. It's almost like reading a white paper,
Hmm.
but in poetic form. It's like a poetic white paper the way he wrote it.
What about the last paragraph was the thing that stuck out to you?
That well, that he actually tells you, like, he comes out and says in no, like, without like brushing over it, that population must be kept down to the level of the means of subsistence, right? That he doesn't consider the idea of more humans creating more things to be able to keep up with population, that the subsistence level will reach a rate of diminishing return, and that we're going to have to kill people off, you know, in order to maintain any semblance of normalcy.
Right. There's no question in his
Right.
mind that what he's saying is accurate. Right.
Exactly.
Okay.
But
Yep.
but he does so without passion or vigor. He does so just for truth. It's like, okay.
So sorry to share it with you guys, but this is how it's going to go.
Yeah, I have no presuppositions coming into this subject. It just is what it is.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Okay. Yeah, no, I was picking up the same thing.
All right. So we're almost done with the preface here. The view which he has given of human life has a melancholy hue, but he feels conscious that he has drawn these dark tints from a conviction that they are really in the picture, and not from a jaundiced eye or an inherent spleen of disposition. Has such colorful language. The theory of mind, which he has sketched in the 2 last chapters, accounts to his own understanding in a satisfactory manner for the existence of most of the evils of life. But whether it will have the same effect upon others must be left to the judgment of his readers. If he should succeed in drawing the attention of more able men to what he conceives to be the principal difficulty in the way to the improvement of society, and should, in consequence, see this difficulty removed, even in theory, he will gladly retract his present opinions and rejoice in a conviction of his error. Thomas Malthus, 7th of June, 1798.
What a noble and good man undertaking this work of
Yeah. Yeah. Now you see why I wrote about Gnosticism.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty crazy introduction. Okay. Yeah.
This is a pretty crazy first sentence of a first chapter. See if you can't make sense of this. The great and unlooked for discoveries that have taken place of late years in natural philosophy, the increasing diffusion of general knowledge from the extension of the art of printing, the ardent and unshackled spirit of inquiry that prevails throughout the lettered and even unlettered world, the new and extraordinary lights that have been thrown on political subjects which dazzle and astonish the understanding, and particularly that tremendous phenomena in the political horizon, the French Revolution, which, like a blazing comet, seems destined either to inspire with fresh life and vigor or to scorch up and destroy the shrinking inhabitants of the earth, have all concurred to lead many able men into the opinion that we were touching on a period big with the most important changes, changes that would in some measure be decisive of the future fate of mankind. Yes, that paragraph is all one sentence.
The, it's almost like it was translated from like Greek into English
Yeah.
in 1798, because like in Greek you can just start throw clauses on
Yeah,
top
you
of
could
other
have like a
clauses.
17-page sentence.
Right, exactly
Yeah, and
right.
your clause is like your subject is the last word of the entire sentence.
So yeah, so he's saying the French Revolution is impactful. Essentially, that's right.
Right. But
Yeah. Okay.
he's saying the impact will either be destructive or brilliant.
Well, so much for having a concrete argument. It's either going to be good or bad.
Yeah. So, um, this is where I took my first note. So this is something I said a while ago. If I remember correctly, reading on the French Revolution, isn't it responsible for the popularity of democracy or across the European continent?
I mean, that's what we're told, right? I mean that's the talking point.
Right.
So I would imagine so. I mean, there's definitely dissenters to that, or people who are, super turned off by how kind of awful and murderous and sociopathic the revolution turned into. I mean, obviously they went right back to a monarchy. So, um, yeah, I mean that's what we're told. I'd have to go with it.
Yeah. So, you know, again, back to what I said prior, this secularizes societies. I mean, the belief that morality flows from the bottom up instead of from God down, it will secularize a society, because then your society deifies popularity. It deifies the popular opinion, right? So you ended up with transgenderism. You end up with the LGBTQ, you know, ideology that is pushing this thing onto children. And you can't say that it's bad for your children because you don't determine the morality of your children. Your children's morality is determined by the masses, not by, a higher power.
Right. And everybody's opinion must be given equal weight as long as you maintain a good liberal order, right? As long as you're not diverting from the liberal path, like that progressive kind of classical liberal school that comes out of there. As long as you're towing that line, you're allowed to have any opinion within it. As a matter of fact, if you don't have a divergent opinion, it might be considered weird. So the more divergent your opinion goes, as long as it's in line with the initial talking points, I mean, you can have people basically doing anything, and it's celebrated because it's different, and it's different because you're different and you're special,
Yeah.
right? You as an individual should be the truest you can be. So the less weird that looks, the less you're being.
Yeah. Well, and it's all subjective as long as popular opinion does not criticize your choices.
Right. You can't exist in the liberal order without being a liberal. I mean,
Yeah.
there is a rule that has to be followed, but within that space, and I say liberal in a very broad sense.
Well,
I
it's
think
kind of like Tom Wood says, the 3x5 card of allowable opinion. You have this allowable space that you're allowed to live within. And if you step out of line in any which way, whether north, south, east, or west, then you are completely shunned, ostracized, demonized, you know.
and this is true because you'll get groups of people like, I don't know, Amazon workers for climate change or something. It's like a Twitter handle, and they will post about Black Lives Matter. They will post about drag queen story hour, and it isn't like that's not what's in the name, right? It's not the stated purpose of their, but somehow through the ether of liberalism, they can kind of grab the arguments without anyone really directing them to do so. So that's how you can kind of see who's in like, you have to signal to the other little cult that's part of the overwhelming church of woke. And by doing that, by saying, listen, I also feel your pain over here, you're signaling that you're part of that group. And then people who don't obviously are pushed out. They're not allowed. You're not allowed to exist if you're not
Well,
part
in
of
the
the order.
well, and the fact that these labels exist within the same space is insane too, because I don't know how many black people or have met over your lifetime, but if I ever went up to any of my friends that are black and told them, "Hey, by the way, your freedom relies on us teaching your children to be transgender and sticking butt plugs up their ass, they're gonna they would probably not want their freedom.
Yeah, right. I mean, if you try to logic it out, it doesn't work.
Right.
Right? Which is the defining it. That's the definition of a church, of a religion, right? There's no reasoning to it. Like I'm not trying to do Aquinas here. Like I can't reason my way to God, and neither could he, right? It doesn't work. There's a certain amount of faith and belief and common ritual you have to share, and that's why we call it the Church of Woke, because that's literally what it is.
Right. Okay, so paragraph 2. It has been said that the great question is now at issue, whether man shall henceforth start forwards with accelerated velocity towards illimitable and hitherto unconceived improvement, or be condemned to a perpetual oscillation between happiness and misery, and after every effort remains still at an immeasurable distance from the wished for goal. Yet anxiously, as every friend of mankind must look forwards to the termination of this painful suspense, and eagerly as the inquiring mind would hail every ray of light that might assist its view into futurity, it is much to be lamented that the writers on each side of this momentous question still keep far aloof from each other. Their mutual arguments do not meet with a candid examination. The question is not brought to rest on fewer points, and even in theory, scarcely seems to be approaching to a decision. Did you have something to say?
No, you keep going.
Okay. The advocate for the present order of things is apt to treat the sect of speculative philosophers either as a set of artful and designing knaves who preach upon ardent benevolence and draw captivating pictures of a happier state of society, only the better to enable them to destroy the present establishments and to forward their own deep-laid schemes of ambition, or as wild and mad-headed enthusiasts whose silly speculations and absurd paradoxes are not worthy the attention of any reasonable man. So you can you start seeing here, he starts still manning kind of the revolutionary kind of point of view. And he does so kind of like in a soft power kind of way.
Yeah, that sort of tendency to say, well, no reasonable person. Yeah. Right. So you're setting that up to just be complete, like you're just dismissing it. And it's such an, obvious fallacy.
But what he describes in that paragraph is political philosophers, whether they're reformers or revolutionaries or utopian,
which is, I don't think that's accurate. It's certainly like a long-winded way to get there, but is he planning on taking the middle ground?
Well, that he suggests he is, and it's not it's not till towards the end of the chapter that you kind of see he takes his own ground. And I'll just kind of like, spoiler alert. What he basically says is these revolutionaries, these political philosophers, they're not wrong. They just haven't thought of this yet. So I'm smarter than them. So if they take heed my way of doing things, then they're going to be successful. That's basically his old, just the first chapter, basically what he gets into.
So yeah, his own utopia.
Yeah, exactly. So not only are they gods on earth, I am a god above them that has esoteric knowledge that they haven't discovered yet.
Okay. I'm glad you mentioned that. That would have been kind of hard to pull out of just hearing the words. So yeah. Okay.
Well, like I said, I have plenty of notes on this. So I kind of like read a paragraph and I was thought about it and I wrote a note down and I was like, all right, how do I want to talk about this?
Yeah. I was actually trying to find a copy like on the internet like earlier when we were taking the break, just to see if I could read it along with you, but I couldn't find anything.
Oh,
I didn't realize it was the words were like that. You have to sort of, it's like talking in Spanish. Like I can do it, but if you just like throw it at me, I'm like, wait a minute. So, yeah. Okay.
Well, yeah. If you need me to reread anything, man, just say, hey, wait, repeat What was that? Repeat
It's
that.
funny. I'm gonna now have to just insert like all kinds of words into every sentence I say to my girlfriend for the rest of the night. Just 17 paragraphs long, no commas.
Man, that first sentence, that first paragraph, which is a sentence, the I didn't understand the way he started that. The great and unlooked for discoveries. I was like, what?
Yeah, that's a way of Englishing that it's completely lost on me.
Yeah, that's 1798 for you. All right. The advocate for the perfectibility of man and society, which I have a note here on this. I wanted to ask you this actually. What is more utopian than believing you have the power and authority to reverse the fall? Because that's what he's saying here. The advocate for the perfectibility of man and society. So the man that is capable of reversing the fall.
Do you know anything about his is he using that as a metaphor, or does he actually believe
This is how he's describing the political philosophers.
Yeah. It strikes me as kind of a metaphor. Um, so it's hard to know like how grandiose somebody's ideas are if they're using a metaphor versus actually believing in like the fall literally.
Now, from what I understand, he was a very devout Catholic, but
Okay.
as you read what he's written in here, you're like, his Catholicism is very materialistic,
Wow.
you know? But I mean, he's taken, even in 1798, he had already taken all the mysticism out of his faith.
Yeah, it probably would have been hard to find in the late 18th century in Catholicism anyway.
Right.
But yeah, and I mean that's really like the heyday of like American or Western Europe Protestantism too. So there's a lot of like the Catholic Church around that time is trying to sort of Protestantize themselves for the first time. Okay. And so if you're an intellectual, you're probably coming away from the Catholic Church with a very pessimistic view of like human anthropology. And I could see that makes sense if he's coming out of that school. It's a very pessimistic view of human anthropology. Like humans are disgusting, flawed, depraved, horrible, right? And if you have that mentality going into writing something like this, clearly you're going to want to try to affect that somehow, to reverse that somehow, which of course is not the orthodox position on human anthropology. So yeah, it's sort of like I have to remember now being like a young Roman Catholic going like, this is morbid, super morbid. Like no wonder nobody wants to do this. So, okay, that makes sense.
All right. The advocate for the perfectibility of man and society retorts on the defender of establishments a more than equal contempt. He brands him as the slave of the most miserable and narrow prejudices, or as the defender of the abuses of civil society only because he profits by them. He paints him either as a character who prostitutes his understanding to his interest, or as one whose powers of mind are not of a size to grasp anything great and noble, who cannot see above 5 yards before him, and who must therefore be utterly unable to take in the views of the enlightened benefactor of mankind. Now, I underlined enlightened benefactor of mankind because in a few paragraphs, he's going to capitalize being when he's talking about God.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay.
But he did not capitalize benefactor. So at that point, he's talking about these political philosophers as the benefactor of mankind. That's how he's describing them, as the enlightened benefactor. And he's saying anybody who's more of a conservative, who doubts the progressive ideology moving forward, right, that they are kind of Neanderthals in this view, or they're viewed as Neanderthals by the enlightened benefactor of mankind.
Yeah. There's a good amount of Neoplatonism running through this as I'm picking, which is goes hand in hand with Gnosticism. They're pretty much, pretty much lovers. So Yeah, very, very interesting.
I'm not familiar with the Neoplatonists' writings and points of view, so I'm going to take
Yeah,
your
I mean,
word for that.
sometimes we use it a little bit too generally, but sort of the kind of the overcoming the difference between like thought and reality, or ideal and form, and like yeah, we shouldn't get it too deep in it. It's probably a whole other conversation. We'll save that for just to explain it would take like 5 or 6 minutes, and I'd rather keep going with the thing.
All right. In this unamicable contest, the cause of truth cannot but suffer. The really good arguments on each side of the question are not allowed to have their proper weight. Each pursues his own theory, little solicitous to correct or improve it by an attention to what is advanced by his opponents. The friend of the present order of things condemns all political speculations in the gross. He will not even condescend to examine the grounds from which the perfectibility of society is inferred, much less will give himself the trouble in a fair and candid manner to attempt an exposition of their fallacy. The speculative philosopher equally offends against the cause of truth. With eyes fixed on a happier state of society, the blessings of which he paints in the most captivating colors, he allows himself to indulge in the most bitter invectives against every present establishment, without applying his talents to consider the best and safest means of removing abuses, and without seeming to be aware of the tremendous obstacles that threaten, even in theory, to oppose the progress of man towards perfection.
Wow, there's all kinds of assumptions and presuppositions in that, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Well, and you can tell by the way he's describing the different thoughts, like where he stands. He's like, yeah, this one might have some flaws, but at least they're not barbaric.
yeah, right, which is a super subjective term, right? It's
Right.
barbaric is usually just the opposite of what I believe.
Right. He's basically saying, the friend of the present order condemns all political speculations in the gross. Like he's not even willing to like entertain anything.
Like that can't even be, like, that statement can't even be true, right? There's no way to
Right.
even like prove that that's a thing, like, right? So that's what such a very interesting way of laying out a what I assume is going to be an argument at some point.
Well, and then the next paragraph starts off, the speculative philosopher equally offends against the cause of truth. So he's like, he's a speculative philosopher, even though he doesn't line up completely with truth. But come on, man, give him a break. Like
I mean, yeah, and I think if I'm hearing this for the first time, I'm wondering what the truth is. Like, what is the truth? I mean, obviously he knows, right? I assume that's kind of what he's going to lay out.
yeah. All right. It is an acknowledged truth in philosophy that a just theory will always be confirmed by experiment. Yet so much friction and so many minute circumstances occur in practice, which it is next to impossible for the most enlarged and penetrating mind to foresee, that on few subjects can any theory be pronounced just, till all the arguments against it have been maturely weighed and clearly and consistently refuted. So now he's talking about experimentation. And if you, as we see where this goes, like he's already explained in the preface, he's talking about population. So he's talking about experimentation on society. You are but a lab rat that they can experiment on to see which way is the best way to balance substance and population.
Yeah, and it seems like he's taking that as a given,
Yes.
right? That's happening or going to happen regardless.
Yeah, that's like he says it is an acknowledged truth.
Right. Okay.
So like this is just the way it is. We're gonna have to apply the scientific method to humanity to determine the best way for you to live from now on.
Man, that other than the language used, it could have been written 3 years ago, right?
Oh, it could have been written yesterday by Klaus Schwab. I have read some of the speculations on the perfectibility of man and of society with great pleasure. I have been warmed and delighted with the enchanting pictures which they hold forth. I ardently wish for such happy improvements, but I see great, and to my understanding, unconquerable difficulties in the way to them. These difficulties is my present purpose to state, declaring at the same time that so far from exulting in them as a cause of triumph over the friends of innovation, nothing would give me greater pleasure than to see them completely removed. So now this is where he gets into, I'm smarter than you. Let me show you where the flaws in your theory are so that I can teach you how to overcome your theory and create the utopia you desire.
It's not super obvious to me right there what he's trying to refute. Is there a concrete, or is it just everyone? Because so
well,
far
he's saying, he's saying the political philosophers have overlooked something, and I found out what that something is. So whenever I am able, if they will listen to me, then they will reach the utopia of reformation that they've been looking for.
Right, the missing piece, the final knowledge. Right. Okay.
Yeah, it's that kind of esoteric view, as I have something that you don't have. I know something you don't know. Every libertarian's dream, knowing something the other person doesn't know.
Actually,
the most important argument that I shall adduce is certainly not new. The principles on which it depends have been explained in part by Hume and more at large by Dr. Adam Smith. It has been advanced and applied to the present subject, though not with its proper weight or in the most forcible point of view, by Mr. Wallace, and it may probably have been stated by many writers that I have never met with. I should certainly therefore not think of advancing it again, though I mean to place it in a point of view in some degree different from any that I have hitherto seen, if it had ever been fairly and satisfactorily answered.
mm-hmm.
The cause of this, go ahead.
I was going to say, interesting throwing Adam Smith in there, because there's a couple of things that I think libertarians at least would know that Smith got wrong, like the labor theory of value, right? Comes from him. So I'm wondering what he's going to pull out of that. Hume, I can totally see. Hume makes total sense to me. I did a whole episode on that dude.
Do you know which Wallace he's talking about?
I do not. I was trying to think through like Henry Wallace, George Wallace. Wait, Henry Wallace is.
I was thinking George Wallace, but I wasn't sure about that time period. So
no, it's not. And I even thought Mia Wallace from Pulp Fiction, but I don't think that's.
Maybe he was a time traveler too. He's like, I saw the future, and it is a movie.
Who does Marcellus Wallace work for?
Is Marcellus Wallace a bitch?
That's what it is. I got my movies mixed up.
Say what again, motherfucker?
What ain't no country I ever heard of? English and what? All right. Anyway,
the cause of this neglect on the part of the advocates for the perfectibility of mankind is not easily accounted for. I cannot doubt the talents of such men as Godwin and Condorcet. I don't know how to say that.
I know we talk about William Godwin, I'm assuming. I don't know who the other person is.
Yeah, it's Condorcet.
No clue.
So I don't know. I am unwilling to doubt their candor. To my understanding, and probably to that of most others, the difficulty appears insurmountable. Yet these men of acknowledged ability and penetration scarcely deign to notice it, and hold on their course in such speculations with unabated ardor and undiminished confidence. I have certainly no right to say that they purposely shut their eyes to such arguments. I ought rather to doubt the validity of them when neglected by such men, however forcibly their truth may strike my own mind. Yet in this respect, it must be acknowledged that we are all of us too prone to err. If I saw a glass of wine repeatedly presented to a man and he took no notice of it, I should be apt to think that he was blind or uncivil. A juster philosophy might teach me rather to think that my eyes deceived me and that the offer was not really what I conceived it to be. After this next section, I want you to answer me if this is where the idea of postmodernism comes from, because that's what I'm reading in this next paragraph. All right.
Well, before we do that,
it starts with this wine scenario.
I will say that you can get a lot of postmodernism from David Hume. So that's where he's trying to kind of, I'd have to do some mental gymnastics to see where Adam Smith fits into that. I'm sure it's there somewhere. But Hume for sure. I mean, you could trace a line from Hume like directly to accelerationism.
Oh, really?
Like, I think, yeah, I think we've actually laid that out in past episodes. I had to go back and listen to exactly how we got there, but yeah,
I've never read Hume, so
yeah, this will be interesting to see where he goes with this.
In entering upon the argument, I must premise that I put out of the question at present all mere conjectures, that is, all suppositions. The probable realization, yeah, I know I laughed at that too. The probable realization of which cannot be inferred upon any just philosophical grounds. A writer may tell me that he thinks man will ultimately become an ostrich. I cannot properly contradict him. But before he can expect to bring any reasonable person over to his opinion, he ought to show that the necks of mankind have been gradually elongating, that the lips have grown harder and more prominent, that the legs and feet are daily altering their shape, and that the hair is beginning to change into stubs of feathers. Until the probability of so wonderful a conversion can be shown, it is surely lost time and lost eloquence to expatiate on the happiness of man in such a state, to describe his powers, both of running and flying, to paint him in a condition where all narrow luxuries would be contemned. I had to look that word up. It means despised. Where he would be employed only in collecting the necessaries of life, and where consequently each man's share of labor would be light and his portion of leisure ample.
Can you read that last sentence again?
Sure. The whole thing's a sentence. No, I'm just kidding.
No, the last clause.
No, listen. Until the probability of so wonderful a conversion can be shown, it is surely lost time and lost eloquence to expatiate on the happiness of man in such a state, to describe his powers both of running and flying, to paint him in a condition where all narrow luxuries would be contemned, where he would be employed only in collecting the necessaries of life, and where consequently each man's share of labor would be light and his portion of leisure ample.
What do you get out of that? It's sort of
all
like,
right, so what he's saying, all right, so he starts with the ostrich thing. So he's saying if a writer says that a man can be an ostrich, I can't dispute that. And if the right until the writer fails to or is able to show that the materialistic vision of that man begins to change into an ostrich-like figure.
Right.
And so
is he sort of saying
he's
like
saying, all right, so
kind of
so after he says that, he says to describe his powers both of running and flying. Ostriches don't fly, so I don't understand where he got that. To paint him in a condition, and I'm gonna translate contemned, because that word confused me a few times when I was reading through it. To paint him in a condition where all narrow luxuries would be despised. So ostriches don't need the luxuries of life. I would take that as being right. So they're not looking for light, AC, those types of things. Where he'd be employed only in collecting the necessaries of life. Ostriches only care about eating and surviving. And where consequently each man's share of labor would be light and his portion of leisure ample. So ostriches don't work. they leisure at like more than they work, which would go back to the Bible verse where Jesus says, don't the birds of aren't the birds of the air taken care of, right? Aren't they fed? Aren't they warm in the winter?
So it
Right.
sounds like he's kind of making the conclusion that human beings sort of are XYZ. And in order for there to be like the maximum potentiality there achieved, he's going to lay out how that happens.
Well, and see, a common theme among these guys, which I've found, and what's most common in modern examples when you read like Klaus Schwab or oh, what's his right hand man's name? I can't think of his name. I have some of his books over there, but I don't want to get up and get to them. What they do a lot of times, they compare man with a dog or with pets. And I know Klaus Schwab has this line in COVID-19, the Great Reset, where he says man is little more than a house trained dog. Like, so, and when you read on with their writings, it's like their whole goal is to create a populace that is not productive, a populace that is enthralled by leisure, that does nothing and only does what pleases them, which is a lot of what you get from the UBI arguments, right? Well, if people got $1,000 a month, then they could try to figure out ways to make money doing what they enjoy doing. Well, doing what you enjoy doing is not the end all be all of life, right? There are a lot of things that people don't enjoy doing that must be done. And so there's this idea of bringing the man down from the conscious being of creativity, of creation, which is the image of God, right? Because God creates the heavens and the earth. Men create, right? Men speak and create. They write. They're poets. They're authors. They make new businesses. They're entrepreneurs. They're inventing the light bulb, and so it's like bringing man down a peg to that of animal behavior in order to rid them of that section of their humanity and to not put them in their place, but to reduce them to little more than slaves.
Yeah, it's the you'll own nothing and like it.
Right. Yeah. Yes. I mean, but think about how your animals act at your house. What are they there for? They don't produce, they don't create. All they do is love you and care for you, right? That's what they want. They want a class of citizens that does nothing but cares for them and coddles them.
Right. Except the reverse being that, I mean, I would literally jump in front of a car to save my dog. And
right.
But
they don't look right, but they don't look at things that way. They look at it as you're either a doer or an order taker, right? You're either a leader or a follower. And it's kind of like this unidimensional view they have in their head that this is how nature works. Nature is those that do and those that teach, or those that nurse, I guess would be.
Yeah, I mean, if your idea of humanity is that, Nietzschean, Darwinian sort of right animal, then that would fit the worldview.
When did Nietzsche write? When was
1900? I mean, the 19th century.
19th century. So it was after this.
The I call them like the trifecta. It's like Darwin, Nietzsche, and Freud are kind of the all together. And Darwin was, I think, a little bit more reluctant to share what he had found with the world, but he shared it anyway. And Nietzsche and Freud were just basically, embrace your sin, man. Like that's all there is.
Well, all right. So Nietzsche and Freud were after this. Darwin was in like the 15th century, wasn't he? 16th.
Let me look on Origins of Man. origin of species. I wanted to say mid 1600s, but I think it was.
That's what I was saying. Like
no, I think they're in the same time period. My internet crapped out on me. Yeah, I think it was the 1850s. Not the 1650s, the 1850s.
Oh, was it around? So it was after.
They were all there right around that same time.
So do you think he got this perspective from Hume? Did Hume influence Darwin?
I know that Charles Darwin referenced David Hume.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't remember in the context. That's something I would have to. This is a fascinating area of study for me, but it's not like the one that I spend the most time in. So I'd have to get outside what I know of those guys and like their anti-Christian milieu, and then try to think of it from like this Klaus Schwab point of view, which is a very difficult mentality for me to like even comprehend.
Right. Yeah.
You know?
Well, what I'm thinking, what I was trying to get at is there maybe another influence in this, in Thomas Malthus writing that maybe he didn't state, or should we just take him at his stated as what he stated, that these are the influences that have led me to this train of thought? That's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah, I have to, after this, I'll have to go back and look into kind of his professional academic background, because I don't know, and I think usually you can tell from a writing, you kind of don't have to do that prior, but he's being so like sweepingly general, like it's hard to know where it's coming from. It's obviously the people he's writing to would know the answer to that, and so he doesn't feel a need to explain it, because like you said, he's not writing it to us.
Yeah, right. Like when he mentions Condorcet, I have no idea, or Condorcet, I don't know who that guy is. I've never heard that name before in my life.
No, I haven't either. On the Origin of Species was published in 1859.
Okay, so it was after this. Yeah. So, okay. I think I may fairly make two postulata. The mixing Latin with English never works, right?
The plural of postulate. Is that what he's? That's not the word. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
First, that food is necessary to the existence of man. Secondly, that the passion between the sexes is necessary and will remain nearly in its present state. These two laws, ever since we have had any knowledge of mankind, appear to have been fixed laws of our nature, and as we have not hitherto seen any alteration in them, we have no right to conclude that they will ever cease to be what they now are, without an immediate act of power in that being, this is when he capitalizes being, who first arranged the system of the universe, and for the advantage of his creatures, still executes according to fixed laws all its various operations. So this argument for natural law is very materialistic. It's very anti-Christian in its view. And, Jesus says man does not live by bread alone. Right. So, and then he covers the passion between the sexes, and he gets a little bit more into that in the coming section. But what this reminded me of, as he was talking about the passion between the sexes, and nobody's figured out a way to curb that passion. You have the Jaffe memo that came out in the 1960s. Have you ever read that?
No. Okay.
So in the Jaffe memo, which is a memo on the internal server of Planned Parenthood, what Jaffe had been sending up to the heads of Planned Parenthood was a way to control population. And one of the things he said was to promote homosexuality amongst the population. And if you promote homosexuality, then the population will account for itself, and there will stop being so many babies being born.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely fits the pattern.
Well, and the transgender movement moves right into that too, because then you have the idea that they are sterilizing children with these procedures.
Yeah, I guess we probably couldn't luck out, and all the guys that turn into girls and the girls that turn into guys just end up having babies anyway. Just in reverse.
I don't know how lucky that would be.
It would be like an incredibly ironic foil to the whole.
I honestly think we should just take all the homosexuals and transgenders and put them on an island together, by themselves and see if they don't come straight eventually.
Yeah, that would be it. That's wow.
It'd be like, all right, look, our species is dying off. We got to do something.
Well, I like that paragraph that he wrote because it's the most straightforward one yet. So it's at least he's saying, okay, basically reproduction and food are very crucial. So let's tell you how you can't have both.
Yeah, let's tackle this subject now. Finally, we're getting to the meat. I do not know that any writer has supposed that on this earth man will ultimately be able to live without food. But Mr. Godwin has conjectured that the passion between the sexes may in time be extinguished. As, however, he calls this part of his work a deviation into the land of conjecture, I will not dwell longer upon it at present than to say that the best arguments for the perfectibility of man are drawn from a contemplation of the great progress that he has already made from the savage state and the difficulty of saying where he is to stop. But towards the extinction of the passion between the sexes, no progress whatever has hitherto been made. It appears to exist in as much force at present as it did 2,000 or 4,000 years ago. There are individual exceptions now, as there always have been, but as these exceptions do not appear to increase in number, it would surely be very unphilosophical mode of arguing to infer merely from the existence of an exception that the exception would, in time, become the rule, and the rule the exception. Assuming then my postulata as granted, I say that the power of population is indefinitely greater than the power in the earth to produce substance for man. Population, when unchecked, increases in geometrical ratio. Subsistence increases only in an arithmetical ratio. A slight acquaintance with numbers will show the immensity of the first power in comparison of the second. So I take it when he says that population grows geometrically while subsistence only grows arithmetically, is he's saying that you can only add to subsistence, whereas the population grows in a three-dimensional way. So if you add to one family, you're adding to millions of families.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting presupposition. I mean, I don't know if that's accurate, right? But if that's what he's saying, okay, that fits the pattern thus far.
Basically, he's saying there's not a 1-to-1 ratio of the growth of subsistence to the growth of population, which I would argue that we have seen the exact opposite. As the population,
yeah, that's what I was thinking. I think it's the exact opposite of that.
Yeah, as population has grown, so has technology, and subsistence has become more likely. Starvation is less likely in modern times than it ever has been in history.
Yeah, I mean, if he was reading Adam Smith, he probably should have checked out the chapter on division of labor, right? Because that's the whole counter argument to that is that you can, exponential growth of a product or a service through non-exponential growth of labor, right? Through technology.
Right.
So it would be interesting to read. I was looking up real quick. Where was it here? Shoot. The what specifically was written by Godwin that he was referring to. And I lost it. Crap. Sorry.
That's all right. We can come back to it.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just keep going. And if you find it, just cut me off. By that law of our nature, which makes food necessary to the life of man, the effects of these two unequal powers must be kept equal. This implies a strong and constantly operating check on population from the difficulty of subsistence. This difficulty must fall somewhere and must necessarily be severely felt by a large portion of mankind. Through the animal and vegetable kingdoms, nature has scattered the seeds of life abroad with the most profuse and liberal hand. She has been comparatively sparing in the room and the nourishment necessary to rear them. The germs of existence contained in this spot of earth, with ample food and ample room to expand in, would fill millions of worlds in the course of a few thousand years. Necessity, that imperious, all pervading law of nature, restrains them within the prescribed bounds. The race of plants and the race of animals shrink under this great restrictive law, and the race of man cannot, by any efforts of reason, escape from it. Among plants and animals, its effects by any efforts are, among plants and animals, its effects are waste of seed, sickness, and premature death. Among mankind, misery and vice. The former misery is an absolutely necessary consequence of it. Vice is a highly probable consequence, and we therefore see it abundantly prevail, but it ought not, perhaps, to be called an absolutely necessary consequence. The ordeal of virtue is to resist all temptation to evil. So I took a pretty long note here because what this reminded me of was the fact that in the Netherlands, they are restricting the amount of nitrogen that farmers can use, which means they're shutting down farms. They're shutting down the amount of farmland that can be used. They're shutting down the amount of plants that can be grown, the amount of cattle that can be farmed. And the farmers have been basically in constant protest for almost 2 years in the Netherlands. And as they shut down these natural gas pipelines and the use of nitrogen among farmers, you're going to get less fertilizer and less food to be sent to third world countries. Therefore, you're looking at an increased starvation rate in just the year of 2023. The expectation is that starvation rises to 60 million people this year because of the broken supply chains and lockdowns under COVID and these green restrictions.
Yeah, I mean, because it's never about helping people, right? It would be, I mean, it's hard to know sometimes if the people who are pushing these things genuinely are deluded into believing they actually work, or if they're proudly aware that they're not going to work. You know, it's I don't know if we'll ever really know the answer to that question, but I mean, it seems pretty obvious to me that it's even just like in a practical sense what the problem's going to be. But I mean, obviously there's no moral inclination from these people, so I'm not even going to broach that, but just from a practical
part of the reason we're reading Malthus is because I believe they're Malthusians.
Right. No, I picked that. So. But I mean, I mean, there was a lot of like heavy intellectual people, including Marx and Engels, who didn't agree with the pessimistic human anthropology that he's showing here. You know, there are plenty of people. So what would be interesting to do is if they're Malthusians, they would have to necessarily not be Godwinians, or, you know, like, you know what I mean? Or whatever the Marxist.
Yeah, but this guy would say that Marx is a speculative philosopher that is missing a piece of the puzzle.
Oh yeah, no, for sure.
That he needs this piece of the puzzle in order for the utopia to be realized, which is actually what happened under communism, right? Because they realize, oh, not everybody's going to go along. How do I get rid of the people that aren't going to go along? Well, you got to kill them. Can't do anything else with them.
Yeah,
and I mean, so they started reducing the population, whether out of necessity to continue their secular religion, or, you know, because they needed more food. I mean, there were many times where they stole the food of the farmers. The farmers starved to death, and they did it all in the name of feeding their military.
No, I mean, that definitely happened. I do know, or at least I remember originally, that Marx, Engels, and Lenin were very much against the Malthusian ideas. They saw it as kind of like cruel injustice, lacking empathy. Like they were not on board. But it's interesting, the synthesis maybe of the ideas in somebody's mind now, right? How they could be a Marxist and a Malthusian, because they're both of those ideas are now coming out of that World Economic Forum sort of beehive.
Well, the
But
way I look at it is kind of like, all right, have you followed any of the news coming out of Canada about euthanasia becoming so prominent there?
No.
Okay, so there was like, I think it was in Canada. It might have been in the UK. One of them, the countries. There was a 23-year-old girl who was diagnosed with depression, and they refused to treat her under the state program, but they offered her euthanasia, and she ended up allowing doctor-assisted suicide. There's also a military veteran that they couldn't afford to treat, but they gave her euthanasia. Like, this is something that is becoming more prominent. This kind of idea of euthanasia as, treatment to what they consider untreatable illnesses.
And they were both like voluntary. They wanted to do that, right? The two people.
Well, the two people wanted treatment originally. When given no other option, the only treatment they were offered was euthanasia, so they chose it because there was nothing else available through the state-run medical care.
Yeah, that's crazy, man.
That's insane.
Yeah, I mean, nothing, quote unquote, nothing else available, right? Just a choice. Like,
well, it's cheaper to kill you than to treat you.
Right.
Yeah.
That might be an axiom that holds true over time. I bet you it's going to be in the next paragraph here. It's definitely cheaper to kill you than it is to,
I doubt he would say anything that plainly.
Right. It'll be a 17 paragraph thought, but that's essentially that. Yeah. In so plainly as we can see in our day, the justification of the impoverisation. Yeah, right. Okay. All right, we'll keep going.
All right. This natural inequality of the two powers of population and of production in the earth, and that great law of our nature, which must constantly keep their effects equal, form the great difficulty that to me appears insurmountable in the way to the perfectibility of society. All other arguments are of slight and subordinate consideration in comparison of this. I see no way by which man can escape from the weight of this law which pervades all animate nature. No fancied equality, no agrarian regulations in their utmost extent could remove the pressure of it even for a single century. And it appears, therefore, to be decisive against the possible existence of a society, all the members of which should live in ease, happiness, and comparative leisure, and feel no anxiety about providing the means of subsistence for themselves and families. So that's what we were just talking about being an ostrich. You're always at leisure.
I really wish I had notes on when I read this a long time ago, but I mean, there's a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? It's very faith-based, right? He's just sort of assuming that all this stuff is true.
Well, and that's why I say it's Gnostic.
Right? Yeah,
well,
I mean,
that's why I say it's Gnostic, because if you remember, whenever when Adam sinned, right? God's like, you're gonna have to work the fields by the sweat of your brow, and it's gonna suck. And this guy's saying, I got a cure for that. I can fix it. It's like, what gives you that power? Where do you get the authority to fix it?
Well, I mean, he's clearly giving it to himself.
Yeah, exactly. He solved the puzzle nobody else could solve.
What an amazing man.
Yeah.
Always looking out for others. What a guy.
Yeah. This is exactly how millions of people get killed. It's how genocides start.
Seriously. I mean, it's a very bold assertion, right? Because so far he has not proven his point one time.
Well, we're only one chapter in. He says he does that in the last two chapters.
Oh, well, in that case. I'd have to leave that one to you and Quinones, man. I don't know how much more of this I could take.
Oh, I was planning having you back every week until we finish this.
Oh, man. I would have to have it translated at least into modern English. This guy's a freaking sociopath, man.
They all are, man.
My goodness.
Consequently, if the premises are just, the argument is conclusive against the perfectibility of the mass of mankind. I have thus sketched the general outline of the argument, but I will examine it more particularly, and I think it will be found that experience, the true source and foundation of all knowledge, invariably confirms its truth.
Yeah, there you go.
He basically just said, I am blessed with the special esoteric knowledge.
Yeah, like a shaman. Yeah.
That's it. That's the first chapter, man.
Wow. Well, I mean, as any good sociopathic academic work, it could have been spoken in like 2 sentences,
Probably.
right?
Yes.
But
one
yeah,
paragraph at the most. Yeah.
That's, I mean, maybe it's just my evolution over 20 years. I don't remember it being that like bold and bleak.
Maybe because it was so bold and bleak and you were so young, you don't remember it.
I just remember it being what I have in my head, which is clearly like an incorrect memory, but it's just kind of laying out a mathematical argument. Like that's what I remember from it. So when I would use the Malthusian trap or I would have these conversations, that was the background I was kind of going from. It's like, well, he's laying out kind of a mathematical pattern. I don't agree with his conclusions, but here's what he was saying. And I definitely don't recall him being that like bold and grandiose with just all the presuppositions that what he's saying is just naturally true.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's like the least, if you're going to back science, that is obviously like the least scientific thing. And so, I mean, now I can see like the last 3 years, that same thing, right? To just basically trust me, trust the science. And it's like, well, you haven't actually made an argument in favor of your thing, which is not scientific at all. It's actually the opposite. Wait a minute, we just lived through 3 years of that.
I can't decide whether it's refreshing or scary that that the elites have always been that narcissistic.
Well, it's at least you know it, right? Like at least it's formalized to the point where you don't have to wonder if they're your enemy or not.
Right.
Like it's like the people, quote unquote, on our team that you have to worry about whether they're the enemy or not. Like Klaus Schwab, he's like, yeah, I'm the enemy. I'm gonna kill all you people.
Yeah. Bye, Felicia. Yeah.
So it's kind of nice the formalization of it. At least you know what you're dealing with.
Yeah. So I'm gonna do this for, let me see how many chapters are in this book. Because I'm gonna do it until I go through this whole book. 19 chapters, and I might do 2 chapters 1 week, or just depending on the chapters, because I'm gonna be reading through it and taking notes as I do it. So it just depends on how it works out.
Well, you should definitely do it for as long as it takes for you to start talking like that in real life, and then so it just becomes so ingrained. Like if you watch like a bunch of like gangster movies, you could start like talking in an Italian accent after watching like 9 hours. It'd be funny to talk to you in like 2 months and your hair's all gray and you're talking in long like
Einstein, like sticking up. No, I don't know why these guys look so fried out of their minds, because this is what they were reading constantly.
Oh my goodness. But no, that was super interesting, man. I didn't you just told me kind of like right before we hopped on that we were going to do this. And I was like, all right, I think I can remember that. It's definitely not what I remember from that book at all. So that's very illuminating.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep going through it. If you ever want to jump on again and get bored out of your mind by listening to me try to pronounce all these fucked up words.
Well, it'll be very interesting if you have other people on to talk about it, to get their viewpoint on it. I mean, it's definitely not my area of expertise. Mostly because it's like massively depressing.
I think I'm going to try to see if Rachel will come on next week to do it. So,
oh yeah, she'd be good. She'd be good for that.
Yeah,
I'll be super interested.
She'll definitely have something funny to say about it. So.
And now I will obviously go buy the book and read through it so that I can get ahead of you. And then once I refresh myself on it, then I'll definitely come back on and have at least something to offer.
Sounds good, man. No, this was great. This was fun. It went just as long as I expected it to. And so, yeah, we're good, dude.
Cool. Perfect.
A lot of fun, man. I appreciate having you on. I'm going to stop the recording now, and I'll break all this stuff up later.
Cool.